Well, I'm excited about this summer, and today is kind of going to be an introductory lesson time to get into 1 Samuel. We'll talk about 1 Samuel specifically next Sunday, but I think it's important that we start someplace because we have had a lot of numerical growth this year, and a lot of people may not have been here over the past few years to kind of know where we're going to go. And so I want to begin with a $10 word that will make us smarter the moment that we hear it, okay? It's this word, meta-narrative. How many of you have heard the word meta-narrative before? Okay, all right, well, moving on. Meta-narrative, if you've taken a lit class, if you've done any kind of literature study, those kind of things, you know what meta-narrative is. And I guarantee you, this is not going to be a quiz, and we're not going to use this word beyond probably the first 5 minutes of this sermon. But I want to talk about it because here's a working definition of meta-narrative: an overarching storyline that gives meaning and purpose to our lives. It's an overarching storyline that gives meaning and purpose to our lives. In other words, your life is a story. And your story is filled with all kinds of adventure. It's filled with maybe sin. It's filled with addiction. It's filled with blessing. It's filled with vacations. It's filled with relationships. Your story is written, but what this is there's a meta-narrative over your life. There is a grand story. That's really the theme, or the word that I'm going to use for that, is a grand story over your life. Everything has a grand story. You read Shakespeare, it has a grand story. You read a John Grisham novel or a Harry Potter story, there's a grand story over that. You go to a movie and there's a grand story in the movie. For example, you might recognize this one. 2 people in the first service had seen this movie. And so I'm guessing, and raise your hand if you've seen any of the 50 Avenger movies. Okay, yeah, shame on you. All right, no, I'm just kidding. What is the Avengers about? Well, it's about a guy named Thor from some other planet who's got incredible strength. It's about a gal named Black Widow who can just fight and do all kinds of stuff. It's about a guy who's frozen for like a bazillion years and then all of a sudden is thawed out and becomes a superhero, Captain America. It's about someone like Tony Stark that's super, super smart. It's about a Hulk that, somewhere along the way, he drank or he ate or he was infected by radioactivity and becomes this green guy. And so this is the story about this team, how they use their strengths and weaknesses to overcome evil. That's the story. And by the way, when I go to a movie, I don't go to look for the meta-narrative. I don't go to a movie to see the grand story. The first task of me going to a movie is to stay awake. Because when the lights go off, so do I. And so if I can stay awake for a movie, it's got to be a pretty good movie, all right? But this isn't the story. The grand theme of Avengers is not how these people use their different abilities to fight the forces of evil. The grand story of Avengers is there is evil out there, and no one can battle the evil unless they have superior strength or superior intellect and can't die. That's kind of the grand theme of the Avengers. Now, most of us don't go to listen to that. We go to be entertained, but that is the grand theme. There are these people, they've got superior strength, they've got superior intellect, and they're able to fight the forces of evil because we, us common people, we can't. Evil overcomes us. We need extraordinary people to do that. Here's another movie, Lord of the Rings, and all the Christians said, yeah, now we're talking, right? Okay. How many of you have seen Lord of the Rings, any of the trilogy of the Lord of the Rings? Yeah, it's you may have read the books. It's just a great story. This is my favorite trilogy. And so what's Lord of the Rings about? Well, it's about a hobbit, it's about a warrior, it's about a wizard, it's about an elf, another elf, and it's about some orcs, about some dwarves, and how they get together because they got to deliver this ring to Mount Mordor so it can be melted away. And there's this kind of freakish-looking guy named Gollum who wants to thwart that, who wants to be able to have the ring for himself. That's kind of what the movie's about. And you go to the movie and you learn that. But what is the grand story of the Lord of the Rings that overrides all of the books, all of the movies? It's this. The evil is not out there. The evil is everywhere. Evil is everywhere, and there is no way that we can stand up under it. And the reason why I say there's evil everywhere is because the ring, if you have the ring, it doesn't make you evil, it just reveals the evil. And the only way that we can ever be delivered from the evil that is everywhere is not by having superheroes with supernatural strength and supernatural intellect, but by rather through the weakness of a hobbit. That's the grand theme, the grand story of the Lord of the Rings. Now, on both of these movie groups, the Avengers as well as the Lord of the Rings, the common theme is this: evil is out there, and there's no way that you and I as common people can withstand it. There is no way that you and I as common people can be able to defeat it. That is the grand story. So now what I want to talk about is, what then is the grand story of the Bible? What the Bible is the Bible just a smattering of all these stories that start in the Garden of Eden, go till heaven in Revelation, and they're not connected, they're not related. This summer we're going to learn about Saul and David and Goliath and Jonathan and Hannah, and we're going to learn about these, and we really don't know anything about that. It'd be very easy for us, because here's the thing. If you don't understand the grand theme or grand story of the Bible, you will never understand the Bible. It will only be just a bunch of stories that maybe have a moral at the end. But we really don't know what they're pointed to. We really don't know what they're involved with. And so we're going to talk about this, and this is one of the reasons why we're covering the gospel according to 1 Samuel. For those of you that might be newer, we have done this every summer. We started several years ago in the book of Genesis, and that first year was just the gospel according to Genesis, then Exodus, then Numbers, and then we're just going on throughout the Bible. Last year, we covered Ruth. The year before that was Judges. Now we're in 1 Samuel. And the reason why we're calling it the gospel according to 1 Samuel is because the very basic grand story of the Bible is Jesus. And if we miss that, then we miss the Bible. We miss a large book. It's not like, well, there's the Old Testament, there's these stories about Noah and the ark, Jonah and the whale, and there's these great miracles about Joseph and all these kinds of things, then Jesus. And I have no idea what the connection is. Well, there is a connection. In fact, after Jesus' resurrection, he's walking along this road, and he comes along with two guys who don't recognize him. They don't recognize him as the resurrected Christ, because Jesus would be the last person they would expect to see, having seen him crucified. Well, now he's alive, and they don't know who he is, and we have this in Luke chapter 24, verse 27. And beginning with Moses and all of the prophets, that's including Samuel, okay? And beginning with Moses and all the prophets, Jesus interpreted to them in all the scriptures the things concerning himself. He goes all the way back and says, that's me, that's me, that's me, that's me, that's me, that's me. He goes into 1 Samuel talking about David and Goliath. That's me. He goes and talks about Samuel. That's me. That's all pointing the way towards me. But I would contend this: there is an even grander theme over and above the theme of Jesus, and it's this. This is, I believe, the theme of the entire Bible: Eden restored. You know the story of the Bible. You know how it begins. There is chaos. There is nothingness. And God, this beautiful God with this beautiful mind and this beautiful idea of creation, He creates, He speaks into creation, this beautiful paradise. It is perfect. Environment, perfect. Beauty, perfect. Everything is perfect. And then He creates two perfect human beings and places them in the middle of this beautiful place called Eden. And He says, it's yours. Manage it, build, create, do all kinds of wonderful things. It's yours. And multiply, make more of yourselves. And I have one command that's a prohibition. And the command is this: you see that tree? Stay away from it. Don't eat it, because if you do, you die. All the other trees you can have. Look at all these trees. You can have them all. That tree there you can't have. And so Adam and Eve, they channeled that inner middle schooler, and they just went right to that tree, right? And they disobeyed God. They disobeyed God because they wanted to be God. They wanted to reign. They wanted to be the ones who called the shots. And yeah, the snake was right there planting those seed thoughts in their mind, but the bottom line is they're the ones who picked and ate the fruit. Well, all of a sudden, all of this beautiful, perfect paradise that was created out of chaos becomes chaotic again. And God lays down the law. He says, I told you you would die. Here are the circumstances of that death. This is what death looks like. And he goes through in Genesis chapter 3, and he lists off some things for the man, and he lists off some things for the woman, and says, this is death to you. And then God turns and talks to the snake. And this is what he says. And by the way, if you're not that familiar with the Bible, I would encourage you to highlight, underline, put in boxes this verse, because if you understand this verse, you'll have a good idea of what the Bible's about. Because everything after Genesis 3:15 is about this verse. This is what God says to the snake. I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and her offspring. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. All right, so we look at that, and we're kind of thinking, all right, God's talking to the snake, and so he's saying that there is going to be this battle between the snake and humanity, and that this woman is going to have an offspring. This woman is going to have a person come from her, and that person is going to completely destroy. He's going to bruise the head of the snake. Oh, the snake will get his licks in because he will bruise the heel of this person. But the whole question that the Bible is responding to is, who is that person? Who is that? Now, just play along for a minute here. Pretend that you've never read the Bible before. You've never read the Bible before. You don't know how it goes. You don't know the storyline. You just start at Genesis 1 and you begin reading, and you're reading Genesis 1 and Genesis 2, and you're thinking, oh my goodness, this is perfect. This is wonderful. What happened? All of a sudden you see what happened. It was Adam and Eve, and you're angry at Adam and Eve because of what they did. And then all of a sudden you come to Genesis 3, verse 15, and now you're thinking to yourself, okay, the question out of my head after reading Genesis 3:15 is, who is that person? Well, right after this in Genesis 4, Eve gives birth to Cain and Abel. So you're thinking, well, it's got to be one of those guys because she's going to give birth to a person. Someone from her is going to come and defeat the snake. Well, we find out that Cain murders Abel, and so we know it's not going to be Abel. We're thinking it's not going to be Cain because he's just as evil as his mom and dad. And all of a sudden, the chaos just grows and grows and grows and grows to the point where the observation is made, all the people could do was evil all the time. So God destroyed the world and preserved 8 people. So we're thinking, okay, Noah, his 3 sons, and his 3 daughters-in-laws, and his wife, the person being referred to in Genesis 3 is part of that crew. We know that much because everybody else is gone. And then we find out through the practice of Noah and his sons that it can't be any of them. But all of a sudden, God chooses in Genesis chapter 12 a man by the name of Abram, changes his name to Abraham, and says, I am going to choose you not because you're spiritual, not because you've been on this quest to find me. It's just that I'm God and I'm choosing you. And I'm going to make a great nation out of you. In fact, this is the promise in Genesis chapter 12. And I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great so that you will be blessed. Abraham, out of you, a great nation is going to come about, and it's going to be amazing, and it's going to be wonderful. And so now all of a sudden we're reading this and we're thinking, okay, the person in Genesis 3 is going to come out of the line of Abraham. But here's the issue. There are 2 lines out of the line of Abraham. There is Ishmael and there is Isaac. So we're kind of scratching our head. Which line is it going to come from? And we find out it's from Isaac. And Isaac has 12 sons. One of them is Joseph, and Judah and the other tribes, they become the tribes of Israel. And you know the story, right? Even if you don't know that much about the Bible, you know that somewhere from the time that Abraham and Sarah gave birth to Isaac and the time that Isaac has 12 sons, and those sons die off, the nation of Israel becomes so great, it becomes a tribal nation living in the foreign country of Egypt to the point where Pharaoh becomes paranoid that the Israelites are getting too large. And so since he has all of the weapons, he makes them his slaves. And for 430 years, the nation of Israel becomes slaves to the Egyptians. For 430, that's longer than our country's history. For 430 years, all they have to do is one thing: obey the Egyptians. That's it. Well, all of a sudden, God raises up a man by the name of Moses after 430 years. And so right now, since we've never read the Bible before, that's the person that God is going to use to kill Satan. That's the person that's going to use. And we find out that's not the guy. It's not Aaron. It's not anybody during the Exodus. But God sets the Israelites free from Egypt. They go into the wilderness. But here's the problem. They don't know how to be a people. They don't know how to be a nation. They've never had to govern themselves. They never had to defend themselves. And so how do they do that? What laws do they obey? Are they just going to be kind of this nomadic Egypt that they live, go around, they worship the Egyptian gods, and they didn't have a Bible, they didn't have anything. They knew nothing about this God that delivered them except that God had chosen their forefather Abraham. That's all they knew. So God, for 40 years, is in the wilderness with them, teaching them, training them how to be a people, giving them laws and commands. He gives them civil laws. What do you do if somebody steals something? What do you do if someone murders somebody? How do we deal with that? How do we make judgment come down on basic laws of civility? God gives them those laws. What about morality? Can I just sleep around with anybody I want? Can I take whatever I want? Can I steal? Can I do? And God gives them laws of morality. And then all of a sudden they know, okay, we've got this God that we don't know anything about, so how do we worship him? In Egypt, we would just make statues, and we would do those kinds of things. And God says, I don't want any statues. This is how you worship me. And he gives them ceremonial laws. This is how you approach me. He gives them these laws, and it's incredible. And that's what the last part of Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy are just God teaching the people how to be a people where he is the one who rules over them. And then he says in Deuteronomy 28, listen, if you obey me, and you obey these civil laws, you obey these moral laws, you obey these ceremonial laws, you do these things to a T, this is what's going to happen to you. Blessed shall you be in the city, and blessed shall you be in the field. Blessed shall the fruit of your womb, and the fruit of your ground, and the fruit of your cattle, and the increase of your herds, and the young of your flock. Blessed shall be your basket and your kneading bowl. Blessed shall you be when you come in, and blessed shall you be when you go out. You will be it will almost be Eden restored. You do what I say. You obey me. And I will bless you. Later on, he says, I will bless you in a way that all other nations will be blessed by you. And so the move towards Eden is occurring. And God is saying, all you have to do is what your first parents should have done. Obey me, trust me, and you will be blessed. But then the same chapter in Deuteronomy 28, God lists some other things, some other consequences. If you do disobey me, this is what's going to happen. But if you will not obey the voice of the Lord your God, or be careful to do all his commandments and his statutes that I command you today, then all of these curses shall come upon you and overtake you. And then he lists a bunch of curses that we're not going to list right now. Cursed shall you be in the city, and cursed shall you be in the field. Cursed shall you be when you come in, and cursed shall you be when you go out. God chooses these people. He says, I want to bless you. I want to bless you. Obey me. And throughout Israel's history, when they obey God, guess what he does? He blesses them. But what we have time and time and time again is they will not bless God. They will not trust God. They will not obey God. Now, up to this point in our Bibles, What can we know about the Bible? Here are a couple of things that I think would be good. Some important lessons. First of all, the continual love and mercy of God. What you will see, if you've never read the Bible before, you will see, oh my goodness, God is uber patient. He is patience on steroids. He loves these people. He is continually merciful. But then we also see the continual evil and rebellion of humanity. We just can't seem to obey. At every turn, even when God blesses us conspicuously, we find a way to pick the forbidden fruit. Even when God blesses us and we are living in an order and a beauty, all of a sudden we have to find a way to disobey and live in chaos. It is our propensity. It is our default. It is the way we are. Now, that's not very good news, but that takes us up to the book of Judges, which we looked at 2 years ago. And the reason why I mention that is because the book of Ruth was written during the time of the Judges. But the time of the Judges is probably the low point in Israel's history. There were several cycles where a judge would come along, or a prophet would come along, a man or a woman would come along who was sold out to God, and they encouraged the people of God to trust God and live for God. And guess what God does? He blesses them. Guess what they do with this blessing? They throw it out and they pursue their own. They want to reign themselves. They want to rule themselves. And so all of a sudden they find themselves in a deeper, abysmal basement of chaos, time and time again. And all throughout Judges, we just see this beautiful God, this loving, merciful God, and this sinful, rebellious people who can't seem to rise above obedience. And that's why I wanted to do this little journey, because 1 Samuel is kind of the conclusion of the period of the Judges. In fact, it's very possible that Samuel and Samson were contemporaries of each other. And so there's a little bit of overlap with Judges and Ruth and Samuel. And so Samuel comes in, and it's a very low time. God is not speaking. God is not moving, and it looks as if he has checked out. And so we're thinking, all right, the person spoken of in Genesis 3, is not Abraham, it's not Noah, it's not Isaac, it's not Jacob, it's not Joseph, it's not Samson, Othniel, it's not Gideon, it's not Deborah, it's not the Judges, and all of a sudden, maybe it's Samuel. Maybe that's the chosen one. Maybe that's the person that's going to crush Satan. So what is the grand story? Go back. I forgot this part. Kim, thank you. I'm glad you remember. The time of the Judges, Judges 21, verse 25. This is the time of the Judges. In those days, there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. In those days, there was no king. Why was there no king in Israel? Because there were thousands of kings. Because everyone wanted to be king. I want to be king of my own life. And guess what happened? When you are king of your own life, you are entering into chaos. If there's one thing that we've learned in our journey through the Bible the last few years, it is that when I live under my own right to rule, which sounds very, very American, I will live in chaos, and the people who live around me will live in chaos. So now we come to 1 Samuel. And what is the grand theme or the grand story of 1 Samuel? What can we learn? There's a verse I'd like to challenge you to memorize this summer. It's just one verse, and it's this one. If you were raised in Sunday school, you can probably see it in flannel graph. That's what I can do. For those of you who don't know what flannel graph is, you can Google it. 1 Samuel 16:7, for the Lord sees not as man sees. Man looks on the outward appearance, but the Lord looks on the heart. We're going to see that time and time again. Case in point, Saul and David. Saul becomes the first king. He's the people's choice. He's this Tom Selleck lookalike. He's incredible. He's handsome. He's tall. He looks leaderly. And all the people were infatuated with his outward appearance. And then we've got David, who could be the stunt double for Barney Fife, and he does not look like anything. Even his own father couldn't see what Samuel saw, what God saw. We see that over and over again in the book of 1 Samuel. And so I challenge you, go ahead and memorize this summer. For the Lord sees not as man sees. Man looks on the outward appearance, but the Lord looks on the heart. I think that we can even use that in our own culture. But what are some things that we can learn from 1 Samuel? And these are a couple of lessons I think that are very important for us. And as you read through the book, and I hope you do, I'll challenge you here in a minute. As you do read through the book, I want you to begin to look at these two primary lessons or themes. The first one is, when God seems most silent, He is the most present. I find incredible comfort in that, because there have been pockets in my life where it seems that God has checked out, or maybe I've checked out, or maybe He's being passive aggressive and He's giving me the silent treatment. I don't know, but I feel as if He is silent. But what we can learn is a grand story in Samuel is this: when God is silent, that is when He is most present. As you read through 1 Samuel, you're going to find out that there's not a lot of, then God said this, and God said that, and God said this. There is that. But it's just people living out their everyday lives. That's all they're doing. We hear about Saul. He's sent out to look for some runaway donkeys. We hear about Samuel, who's been given up by his mom because of a promise, living in the temple in Shiloh. We hear about David. We don't even hear about David. We can't even see David because the storyteller is saying he's off herding sheep someplace, even forgotten by his own dad. And so we look at these things. It's just going on. It's just things going on. And it seems as if this is just a story that is void of any grand story about Eden restored. But all of a sudden, we will begin to look and see where this story is going. We're going to find out that God is very, very present. I think that's true in your life and mine. Your life has stories. Tomorrow, your story is going to begin with called Monday. And then you're going to wake up on Tuesday, and the story will be called Tuesday. And you're going to do whatever you do on Tuesday. You're going to do whatever you do on Wednesday. And it's going to be as if God is silent. Do not think for a moment, because the grand story of the Bible is that God is ever not there. He is always present. In fact, in those moments when it seems that He is most silent, He is most present during those times. But then there's another lesson I want you to think about, and this one here: take the long view of your life. I guess another way you can say this is live out your life with the grand story in mind. I think that's very important. In both services, I had the pleasure of sitting and being led in worship by the the creative team, the creative arts department in both services. And both times, it was just God appointed. I was just led to think about the grand story. And I wasn't even really thinking about it at the time. I was thinking about this or that and people I got to talk to. And all of a sudden, I am just lifted up and I begin to think about this grand story. I think that's one of the reasons why we gather on Sunday. In fact, Brian, you guys, if you would please come on up and prepare to sing another song. But I think that's what happens to us. For example, in a couple of weeks, we're going to have communion. And we're going to do some different things for communion for this next year, and we're very excited about that. But we're going to be doing this. And so how long are we supposed to do communion? It says in 1 Corinthians 13, but or 11, how long are we supposed to do communion? And Jesus says, I want you to do this. I want you to get this little shot glass of grape juice, and I want you to get this little breadcrumb, and I want you to do this and so that you can remember me until when? Until I come. Until I return. What is that? It is thinking about the grand story. Because we can be so overwhelmed in our everyday lives of things, and we think that the grand story is my marriage. The grand story are my rebellious children or my obedient children. The grand story is my singleness. The grand story is my job. That's my grand story. Where I live, that's my grand story. And we can be overwhelmed with circumstances to the point that we miss the long view. We did this a couple of years ago, and it requires 100% participation. I'd like you just to find something up on the wall here and just focus on it. Would you please just look at it, stare at it, and just look at it just for a second. Your eyes are getting very heavy. No, I'm just kidding. All right, now what I'd like you to do is keep focusing on whatever you've chosen to look at, and then put your hand in front of your face with your fingers spread wide open. Okay? Thank you for participating. Okay? Now what I'd like you to do is still focus on that thing, but look through your hand, if you can, through the fingers of your hand. Can you see it? It's in focus. It's right there. I'm looking at the wall, the little clock on the wall, and that's what I'm focused on. Now what I'd like you to do is leave your hand in front of your face and change your focus to your hand. Now focus on your hand. You're still looking. It's very difficult. For example, I'm looking at a digital clock on the wall back there. I can't really see it. I can see my hand. I can see the lines. I can see where I have a bruise when I was shoveling. I can see different things, scars from the past. I can see all the details of my hand. Now, once again, change your focus and look at the point beyond. And all of a sudden, can you see your hand? You can. You just don't see the detail of it. You're seeing beyond the hand. What the gospel does, you can take your hand down, otherwise we'll be thrown up here in a minute. But what the gospel does is it takes us through our circumstances and allows us to see the grand story. And the grand story is Christ. Amen. Eden restored, where the grand story is there will be a day when Jesus will walk with us in the cool of the day, not in a garden with only 2 people in it, but in a city that is perfect. And that is the horizon, and that is what we live for. You know, when we begin each service, this morning Pastor Jason did it, and sometimes I do this, sometimes other staff members. The first words we want to talk about is, are you weary and need a rest? Do you grieve and long for comfort? Do you feel worthless and wonder if God cares? Have you failed and desire strength? Are you doubting and need assurance? Have you sinned and need a Savior? You know what we're doing there? We're confessing that we're right here. I'm tired. I'm grieving. I failed miserably. I have my doubts. I'm sinning. I'm right here. I'm right here. But then everything changes in the next phrase. Arcade Church opens wide her doors with a welcome from Jesus Christ. Now, do your circumstances go away? No, they're right there. But all of a sudden, what our heart's desire is that you begin to lift up your eyes and you begin to focus on something beyond your circumstances. And all of a sudden we say, Arcade Church opens wide her doors with a welcome from Jesus Christ. He is the ally of his enemies. He is the defender of the guilty. He is the justifier of the inexcusable. He is the friend of sinners. The whole reason why we do that is not because, we got to start the service somehow, but because we are so overwhelmed with what we are experiencing Monday through Saturday, so that when we gather together, we can be able to look beyond our circumstances, look at the long view and see Christ, this grand story of Eden restored, and you and I are characters in that story. We play a part in that story. We see God's story, and we recognize that sometimes life stinks. Sometimes the marriage is not clicking on all cylinders. Sometimes the kids don't come home. Sometimes you don't get the promotion, or you don't get the job, or you don't get the house. And sometimes all of that stuff happens to you on Monday. But the whole time we're thinking about that, our eyes are on Christ, the grand story, because that's what we are moving. That's why, for example, Paul in Philippians 4, he's in prison. We talked about this about 3 weeks ago. He's in prison. And he says, in prison, he says, I've learned to be content in the situation I'm in. Paul, what are you smoking? I mean, what is going on? And what's he doing? He's saying, yeah, I'm in prison. Yeah, it stinks. I'm hungry. I've got sores. I've been beaten. But what's even more important than that, I've got Jesus. And so that means whether I'm in prison or in Beverly Hills, I always have what I want. I always have Jesus. That is why he's looking at the long view. maybe that's what needs to happen today. And so I've asked the team to come up and go ahead and just give us this song again. It's the one that we sang right before the teaching time. Steve, you can go ahead and move that if you want. Thank you. And just listen to the lyrics and sing along and lift up your voice. If you want to come down here and pray, please do that. If you just want to stand or sit or raise your hands or even just leave and just walk, go for a walk before you get in your car and think about this. I have been so overwhelmed with this view of my life, and it's right here. And Christ has given me this grand story that is so far beyond what I can think. And He's promised, and He's been faithful. And He will always be faithful. And so my prayer, Lord God, is as you've been faithful in the past, do it again and again and again and again. Let's stand together and let's sing.
Thanks for listening to the Arcade Church podcast. Visit us at arcadechurchonline.com, Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram.